All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Heather Deer, and I am the Director of Family Engagement here at William and Mary. Welcome back to our Tribe Transitions webinar series. Today we're talking all things student accessibility services and some upcoming deadlines that your student may want to be aware of. Just like the rest of our conversations together, Q&A will happen at the end of our session to allow our presenters plenty of time to cover the robust information that they have for us. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded in just a day or two to our YouTube channel. Of course, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to know as soon as I get that webinar uploaded to YouTube. And this is also available on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So to any of our audio listeners, thanks for tuning in. So today we're talking student accessibility services, but before we dive in, I do just want to say a few words about our book club on the same page, a William and Mary Family Book Club. This is a virtual book club experience for all of our incoming families here to William and Mary, and we do have a deadline coming up on May 31st to sign up for On the Same Page. For at least the first 500 households that sign up for our book club, we will ship a book and a book club kit to you for free. All we need is the shipping address when you register for the book club experience. Why would you join our book club experience? It's a really intentional and focused program to help you reflect on your students' transition from home to William and Mary, to reflect on your role as a supporter during your student's journey and really how your role might change and shift and all of the emotional and practical shifts that come with that transition. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect with other William and Mary families through discussion boards and also our Zoom meetings that we have throughout the summer and a post move-in meetup that we have every year. So just important to note that registration does close on May 31st, and we really look forward to having a robust book club experience this summer. Okay, with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to my presenters. We do have two representatives from Student Accessibility Services with us here today, so I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to y'all to take it away.
Thanks, Heather. All right. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here to hear all about student accessibility services. We're super excited to be here and just give you a little bit of information about, what we do in student accessibility services and how we can support your students while they're here. So we're just going to start with a brief introduction. And as Heather said, if you can go ahead and save all questions till the end of the presentation, that way we can make sure we get through all of our content. And we're happy to answer any questions you might have at the end. I will say maybe in terms of questions at the end, just maybe asking general questions. And if you have more specific questions to your student, you can definitely schedule a meeting with us as well as with your student to go in more depth about those specific questions, just to preserve confidentiality of each student. So again, thank you all for being here. My name is Mary Christine. I am the interim director here in Student Accessibility Services. We also have other team members who are not present in this webinar, but I'll go ahead and just put a face to a name in here. So besides me, you'll see Arena Scott. She's our assistant director of testing. And Allison, you're next, so I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Accessibility Services. So I work with all of our incoming students on accommodations as well as run our pre-orientation program, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Great, thank you. We also have an administrative coordinator here in Student Accessibility Services. Her name is Alyssa. So if you're calling our office or stopping in throughout the summer or at the beginning of, the fall semester, she'll probably be one of the first faces that you see. If you have questions, feel free to call us directly and you'll be probably speaking with Alyssa. We have three wonderful graduate students in our office. So Allie Funk is one of them, Evelyn McCain, and Marissa McDole. Allie and Evelyn both support our assistant director of testing in regard to anything related to testing and testing accommodations. Marissa, unfortunately, is only with us until the end of this summer, but she is also she is meeting with students this summer to help us determine reasonable accommodations for students with disabilities. So We will be discussing more in depth in our slides about welcome meetings and meeting with students before we make a determination on accommodations. But as your students are scheduling welcome meetings, please keep in mind that they should be either meeting with myself, Allison, or Marissa for us to make those determination on accommodations. Those are the three people if you're joining your students' meetings, you will be seeing as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But I guess we can go ahead and move on to our slides now.
Okay. So the first thing we kind of wanted to share is just a little bit more about what we actually do in our office. So Student Accessibility Services, or SAS for short, we offer reasonable accommodations for students with disabilities upon request. And it's on an individual basis through the interactive process. So it's very individual. We kind of go off a case by case basis of what is kind of the needs of the student. And it's a little bit different than you might be used to with K-12 education, in the sense that students have to reach out to our office first to get kind of started with us. So, one of the things that we focus on here in our office is student independence and self-determination, which kind of means that we want the students to really feel empowered to reach out to us themselves. And we're kind of emphasizing empowerment and accommodation over limitation and trying to create a comprehensive and accessible environment here at William and Mary. So we offer support to students as they request accommodations. We offer various different services and resources for expanding and adapting academic skills and accessing campus life.
Wonderful. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what types of accommodations that, a student may be requesting and that we provide to students. So we provide four different areas of accommodations. I will say academics is probably one of our most common accommodations that students do come in and request. So we offer, again, academic accommodations. So this may include note-taking support, any testing type of accommodation, such as extra time on exams, or any type of assistive technology during class, live captioning. As noted at the bottom of this slide, this is not a comprehensive list of all accommodations. And as Allison mentioned previously, that all accommodations are determined on a case-by-case basis based on a student's needs. So not every student with the same disability will receive the same accommodations. That may look different for each student depending on their needs, if they have additional disabilities. So again, everything is determined on a case-by-case basis, and this is not just a comprehensive list of what we do offer, but in our meetings with students that we'll be able to determine what we think is most reasonable based on each student's needs. On this slide, we have a picture of our testing center and what that looks like. So our testing center is designed to be a reduced distraction environment for students with disabilities. Many accommodations that students are approved for are either a reduced distraction environment or to have a private testing space to take their exams to, help eliminate any environmental, noises, etc. So this is what our space is, designed for. As well as making sure that students receive their extra time where that might not be as possible in the classroom. So this is just a small little picture of what our testing center looks like. If you're here at all this summer and happen to stop by, we're happy to show you it. Or if you want to come see it in the fall before classes begin, or that's also available too. So um, we'll get in depth about our welcome meetings and what that looks like, but academic accommodations, yes, we're meeting with students right now regarding academics. Your students won't be hearing about approvals for academic accommodations probably till a little bit later on in the summer, maybe starting in June. In our next couple slides, we're going to talk about housing accommodations, and there is a deadline to meet for that, so we want to kind of keep that focused. And I know we've already met with a lot of incoming freshmen already that haven't heard too. We were just wrapping up our final exams last week, so we now are in full incoming class of 2030 mode. So we'll go ahead to the next slide about the other accommodations that we provide.
Yeah, so two of the other kind of less frequent accommodation kind of categories that we provide are support with dining and transportation on campus. So we work really closely with all of our campus partners to kind of ensure that students have access to every kind of aspect of campus that they may need based on whatever their disability may be. So one of those is working really closely with the dining team at William and Mary. So we do support students if they need a reduced meal plan for medical reasons. We also work really closely with our campus dietitian, who supports students with food allergies or medically restrictive diets as they kind of navigate the dining halls and kind of what options may be available to them. We also have some kind of other services available for students for dining if they have specific dietary needs related to medical issues that we'd be happy to kind of talk more about in welcome meetings or share information on how to get in touch with our dietitian to talk about some of those. We also work really closely with parking and transportation to support students that may have transportation needs both on and off campus. On campus, we support students that may have physical disabilities or temporary injuries that may need assistance kind of navigating campus or getting from class or to their dorms through our limited mobility shuttle service. And then we also support students that may need access to a car for medical reasons as an underclassman because as I'm sure many of you know, only juniors and seniors here at William and Mary are allowed to have a car on campus. So any students, freshmen or sophomores that may need a car for medical reasons, that's something that we're happy to discuss in a welcome meeting as well.
All right. So on to housing. That's another common accommodation or one of the more common accommodations that students do request. So in general, we provide housing accommodations to ensure equitable access for students living within the residence hall. So freshmen and sophomores are required to live on campus. So we want to make sure that, they're accommodated if that's a need that the student has. So our team, we work really closely with Residence Life to ensure like students' accommodations are met and that they're placed in residence halls that meet their accommodations. Some common accommodations that students request are air conditioning, single rooms, first floor elevator access, and that's again just a comprehensive, short list. There could be other things that students may request based on their needs. We do have a deadline that is coming up that I mentioned earlier in regard to housing. So all incoming freshmen and transfer students requesting any type of housing accommodation must submit the request to our office by May 29th. That is not just submitting a request, but that's also including like the documentation that we need from a student's provider in order to determine the reasonable accommodation. So if your student can get that in by that date, that would be wonderful just to help us make sure that we can meet the deadline for that we need to meet with Residence Life so that they can send out the room selection time slots in a timely manner. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to always like reach out to our office, specifically related to housing, since that deadline is coming up in exactly 9 days now. So it's coming up quickly, but we're really, excited. And if your student does submit everything by May 29th and does meet with us by then, or if, you talk to us and you might not, get to meet with us exactly by May 29th, but maybe like a day later or two, that's fine. We will make sure that your students' accommodations are approved and sent to Residence Life by the deadline that we need to meet with Residence Life. So I know that is something that is, concerning to some people. So we want to make everybody aware that, if students have everything in by then, they will not miss out on getting the accommodations that they need for housing.
All right. And so now I'm sure a bunch of you are wondering, after hearing about all the kind of accommodations we offer, how do students actually get involved with our office? So we have kind of the brief steps of how to get started. We use a system called Accommodate to keep track of all of our accommodations and all of our students. And so everyone that has a William and Mary login, all students will have an Accommodate account. So once your student has their William and Mary email and all of those types of things, they're able to log into our Student Accommodate portal. And that link can also be found on the front page of our website. Once the student logs into the Accommodate portal, they're going to want to go on the left-hand side of the screen. There will be a tab called Accommodation. And from there, they want to click on accessibility request, and there will be a form that they have to fill out. It'll take usually on average about 10 to 15 minutes for a student to fill out. And that basically helps us get all the information we may need about what the student is requesting before we actually meet with them so that we know kind of what we need to cover during the welcome meeting. Students will also need to submit that medical documentation that MC talked about earlier. We have pretty comprehensive documentation guidelines on our website, but we're also more than happy to answer any questions that people may have about kind of what types of documentation we require. Documentation can be submitted via that Accommodate portal, but it can also be emailed directly to us at sas@wm.edu, or your medical provider can fax it over to us if that's easiest. And then after all of those steps are complete, that is when your student will be ready to book a welcome meeting with a member of our team. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what a welcome meeting looks like.
Great. Thanks, Allison. So, in regard to a welcome meeting is essentially like an intake meeting where it's an interactive conversation with the student and someone from our office to discuss the student's disability, how it impacts them in, an academic setting, um, in a setting related to residence life or just on campus overall, just to help us determine, what accommodations we're going to be able to approve for your student. That's why, as Allison mentioned, it is really important if your student can submit that request before they do book a welcome meeting. So that way, our staff have an opportunity to take a look at what your student has requested and be prepared for the meeting and just being able to have, a meeting where it's productive for everybody, so that during that meeting we could just talk about that, go over any questions you might have, talk about next steps. Um, During those welcome meetings too, we'll kind of have a conversation about, I know in high school some accommodations look different like than they do in higher education, so we can have conversations about that, what the differences might be. There's also some really good information on our website under the class of 2030 with some transition information, so I would encourage you to take a look at that and just a little bit more information about, the difference between, jumping into higher education versus high school. So in regard to welcome meetings, you are able to join those welcome meetings with your student if your student would like you to join those meetings. We do need to have the student present in those meetings, though, before we can make any type of determination. I know a lot of your students are still in school right now and getting ready to graduate. So just keep that in mind. We do need to meet with your student, so just try to find like a time that might be good for your student to be present in those meetings. Just the welcome meetings do take an average of 15 to 30 minutes, and we offer those meetings in various ways. So we can do it virtually, over the phone, or in person. We are here all summer, so if you are in the area, we're happy to meet in person. But if you're not in the area, like I said, we can meet virtually or over the phone. And they could take from anywhere to 15 to 30 minutes, really dependent on the student's needs and what they're requesting. And again, I mentioned just to make sure that their request is submitted ahead of the welcome meeting, just so we can, make sure that the conversation is productive as possible, and instead of having to go in after and then putting in the request.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, one way that you all as families can support your students kind of as they make this transition, we understand that kind of accommodations in high school may look different for students as they come into college. And so our office is kind of here to help students kind of foster that independence and self-determination. And we're helping students kind of develop the skills to be able to advocate for themselves throughout our interactive process, which really allows your students to kind of take initiative for themselves and what their needs are. So we really encourage families to kind of try to empower their students to take the lead on communicating with our office and beginning the accommodation process. As Mary Christine said, families are more than welcome to join in welcome meetings if the student would like. But we really need the student present so that we can talk to them about what their needs are and what they find challenging when it comes to academics or housing or those sorts of things. So Just wanted to mention that. And then I guess I can talk about this one as well. We do have our Summer Connections program coming up, which is a week-long supportive experience for incoming students with disabilities that is run by our office. The goal is to help students prepare for their arrival in the fall. It offers an introduction to academic life through a mock class. It offers kind of an acclimation to campus and for students to kind of get used to what campus looks like and what kind of navigating around campus looks like. It's a chance to meet other incoming students as well as some returning students. It's a chance to learn advocacy skills. The program this year will take place from July 27th to July 31st. Applications are open now and they will close on May 29th. So we do have a QR code here that takes you to our Summer Connections website for anyone that may be interested in learning a little bit more about that. And if anyone does have any specific Summer Connections questions, feel free to send either our direct SAS email with any questions. I'm happy to answer them. This program is completely free for students. It includes housing, meals, and all activities. And this program is only made free by the generosity of private donations. And so we do want to mention that it's really important that if your student chooses to register and then can no longer make the program for any reason, to please let us know as soon as possible, just so that we can open up that spot to any other students that may be interested. All right. That is all we have. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we're happy to take any questions you guys may have.
Yeah, Q&A is open. So families, go ahead if you have any questions for student accessibility services. Now is the time to find that Q&A feature here in Zoom and pop some questions into the chat. So we'll wait and see here if any of the Q&A questions come up. I will say I am curious. I know you covered briefly the housing accommodations coming up. What are typical reasons that students are requesting housing accommodations? What do you see most frequently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for housing accommodations, we see a lot of students requesting them for mental health related disabilities or chronic conditions, mobility challenges. So, those are some of the common like disabilities that we would approve housing accommodations for. So, and again, we would talk about that through our like interactive process with the student in a welcome meeting and just really talk about how their disability is impacting them in a residential setting. Great question. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. And, I've been working with families for a few years, and I get a lot of questions around, like, oh, I don't know if my student really needs accommodations. Maybe we'll wait until the fall, until they're settled and everything is started, and then we'll have the conversation about accommodations. I tend to advise them that, it's better to have an accommodation and maybe not necessarily need it versus having to go in during the semester when everything is started and get that set up. But I would love to hear both of your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I would agree on that. The accommodation is there if you need it. If you need to use it, then that's great. But if you do, that way you don't have to worry about, not that it doesn't take a long time to get a meeting with somebody from our office, but that way it just kind of saves that extra step and you just already have the accommodation and we can walk you through on like what next steps look like in regard to notifying your professors about your accommodations that you're approved for because there are steps after you are approved for academic accommodations that need to be taken in order to notify faculty about the accommodation. If you have testing accommodations, do need to book a testing space in our office. So we always recommend that students, start off if they've used accommodations in the past or think they might need one to definitely, reach out, get something in place. And then if you don't need it, great. If you do, then it's there. I also will say that students, might not know everything that they do need until they actually do get started. So you can come in, get started with, say, for instance, some testing accommodations, but say, for instance, you think you're going to be okay with not needing any note-taking support. You can always come back to our office and we're happy to have more of a conversation about what your student is currently experiencing in whatever type of setting, and we can always add additional accommodations as they get through the semester or their years here.
Yeah, I can also share a little bit more about kind of why it's important for students with that want housing accommodations to reach out to us before that deadline that's coming up. And that's because once your child is makes that room selection and is placed into a room, it can be a lot trickier, even if we approve housing accommodations after the fact, to get a room change. And so making sure that you're really proactive about requesting housing accommodations by that deadline is really important so that we can ensure that the student is placed in a spot that meets all of their needs, without having to kind of worry about that room change process.
That's great context. In addition to that, someone asked, do intake interviews or the welcome meetings need to happen before May 29th for housing accommodations?
Yes, that would be helpful because we cannot make it like a determination until we do have those Melcom meetings. If there is a challenge where you're not able to get in before the 29th for whatever reason, just reach out to our office by giving us a call or sending an email, and we can talk that through and make sure that you get on the schedule or just something figured out so that that deadline can be met.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see here. How do you recommend families or students schedule a meeting with the campus dietitian? Is that something that you can help with if they reach out to your office for dining accommodations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if students do happen to make a welcome meeting to talk about potential dining accommodations, we're happy to kind of refer them to our campus dietitian that way. There is also, I can maybe attach her email in the chat if that could be helpful, of our dietitian so that students and families are more than welcome to reach out to her directly if they have any questions about the dining hall when it comes to allergies or things like that. So, let me go ahead and pull up her information while we kind of keep answering questions. I can put that in the chat for anyone that's interested in reaching out to her.
Wonderful. All right. I've got a couple questions in here. Does William and Mary still have any residence halls that do not have air conditioning? Based on the current Residence Life website, I'm seeing that a couple of halls, the halls in the Botetourt complex, have air-conditioned lounges, but not air-conditioned rooms. And that is just what's on the Life website at this current moment in time. So is there a process for students to request an accommodation if they might require air conditioning for a diagnosed disability?
Yeah, so it's the exact same process as any other housing accommodation. Even if students are just requesting air conditioning, they will still need to kind of go through that registration process and schedule a welcome meeting with us. The only difference is for air conditioning accommodations, those only last for a student's first year because all upperclassmen dorms are fully air conditioned, so they won't have to worry about kind of being in a space without air conditioning after that first year.
Thank you, Allison. Can you give some examples of housing accommodations that would be good for ADHD students?
That's a good question. So that is not something we like typically see a lot of like students for ADHD requesting, for specific housing accommodations. I know that is some of the requests we do receive from students with ADHD. A lot of them do request to have their own room, because of ADHD, and reasons being that they said that they need like a more quiet place to study to eliminate distractions and whatnot. But there are other places on campus where students can study. We're not typically approving just single rooms for the purpose of having a space to study. There are like other study spaces within the residence halls. So in regard to, I won't say that we definitely couldn't approve any housing accommodations for ADHD, but it's not as typical. But that's again why we have these meetings with our student, these intake meetings or welcome meetings with our students to discuss each student's needs and see what would be most appropriate for the student. So everything's on a case by case basis, but that's a wonderful question. We do receive that a lot in regard to ADHD and having, having students having their own like space to study in their room. But we're happy to talk about other locations and what might be helpful to your student that's been helpful for other students.
Yeah, and I do see a couple other questions in the Q&A, some really specific conditions or specific questions about if this, then this. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would just recommend that your students save those questions for their welcome meeting that they have with Student Accessibility Services. It is such a highly personalized process. Every student is going to receive different accommodations based on their needs and their specific circumstances. And that welcome meeting can also provide more detailed information about documentation requirements, if any is required. So I see some of those questions, just want to acknowledge that they're there. And the answer is it's hard to answer until your student has that welcome meeting and goes through the process. Does that sound about right, MC and Allison?
Yes, I would definitely agree on that. I think too, just, just to make sure too, we're preserving like confidentiality between each student. And again, we want to have like these conversations with the student present as well about their disability. And we wouldn't be able to make any type of determination now anyway. So I think really making sure that you save those questions for the welcome meeting, and we're happy to answer any of those questions that you have during that time.
Thank you. Okay, what is the deadline for requesting academic accommodations? And what kind of documentation do you typically need?
Good question. So in regard to documentation, dependent on, if a student has had any type of evaluation done in the past, we need the most current evaluation that the student has. A lot of people will reach out and ask if they need to get evaluated again. There are other ways to obtain documentation, so we don't necessarily need you to go spend money or a lot of money on getting those evaluations, and I also know that takes a lot of time too. So there are other types of documentation that we can receive that will look at to make a determination on accommodations. Whether it's a letter from the provider, we also have specific forms on our website that pertain to each type of accommodation type. So, for instance, on our website, there's something called the academic addendum. If you're not able to get an evaluation, their provider can fill out that form or write a letter just outlining what their disability is and what they recommend that the student will need for accommodations, and we can accept that as a form of documentation. And in regard to the deadline for academic accommodations, there's no particular deadline. We encourage students to reach out to us before the beginning of the semester so that when they do get started, their accommodations are in place. And that way we can walk them through on how to do something called activate their accommodations, which essentially is giving us permission to email their professors to let them know what they've been approved for in regard to accommodations so that the professors have those accommodations early on in the semester so that they're aware that, say for instance, a student has a testing accommodation, they know the student might be testing in our office to take their exams rather than in the classroom.
And I do know that in the Tribe Guide checklist for students, we have kind of a soft deadline that by August
Mm.
1st, they should complete the request for academic and non-housing related accommodations. And that is just to make sure we wrap up that process before the semester begins and they're worried about moving in and starting orientation. So, if you have that time and space and capacity over the summer to meet that deadline by August 1st, that's just one less thing that all of you have to worry about as your student gets started on campus. Okay. Do academic accommodations and housing accommodations renew every semester? Is there a process that students will need to take to continue their accommodations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can go ahead and answer that one. So, our housing accommodations will automatically roll over each academic year. And so students will not need to do anything. Like I said earlier, with that air conditioning accommodation, that one will just be for kind of the 1 year and it will not roll over, but any other housing accommodations will automatically roll over. In terms of any academic, dining, or transportation accommodations, those do need to be activated at the beginning of each semester. And that just allows, kind of like Mary Christine said, it allows the students to be able to notify their professors of that specific semester. So they don't need to do anything as far as like meeting with our office again or anything like that. The accommodations will stay the same their entire time at William and Mary, but there is kind of an additional step within that accommodate portal that we mentioned earlier where students will go in and select which accommodations they want to use for each class so that we can go ahead and notify their professors of what they've been approved for. And that goes for kind of transportation and dining as well. We kind of want to keep our campus partners up to date with kind of what a student's accommodations may be. If it's in terms of meal plans, we want to make sure that that's adjusted in the system. If it's in terms of having a car on campus, we want parking and transportation to know that the student is allowed to have their car on campus. So that's kind of a little bit of information about why we need students to activate them each semester. It's just so we can keep everyone that needs to know kind of aware of what's going on.
Thank you, Allison. I'm curious, another question I often get from families and something I coach through is maybe a student having a reluctance to sign up for accommodations or request accommodations for fear that faculty will know that they have accommodations and others in class may know that they have accommodations. I'm curious how your team handles confidentiality, one, and then just any thoughts or advice for families as they navigate some of that hesitancy with their students.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So just to be upfront, like with who knows about what they do know about. So we cannot, when we meet with a student and they disclose their disability, we cannot share the student's disability with anybody, outside of this office. So when we're sending letters to professors, all those letters are saying are what the student's accommodations are. It's not going to disclose, for instance, that your student has ADHD or whatever the disability might be. So the professor's not going to know that unless your student does decide to disclose that to their professor. And some students do, whereas some students want to keep that more private, and that's totally fine. We can't disclose that to anybody in residence life. We can't really disclose that to anybody. That stays within our office, and that's just for our purposes to make our determination on the reasonable accommodation. We explain to students that these accommodations aren't there for you to, get ahead of anybody else, but they're there to like level the playing field essentially and making sure that there's no barriers to access that the student might need. So I know that sounds easier said than done in terms of like encouraging students to meet with us, but we are an office where we feel like we're very welcoming and very just here to support your student. So that's what we really want to, mention that it can be a little bit scary, especially coming in here for the first time and just trying to advocate on your own. When I know a lot of students, their parents have been doing that for them for a long time, but it's also a good start for them to kind of start beginning advocating on their own, letting us know what their needs are, and we're knowing that we're here to support them through their journey while they're here at William and Mary.
Yeah, I do also want to add on to that. Within that kind of activation process that I mentioned, when it comes to professors, that is fully customizable. So if a student thinks that they won't need their accommodations, say that they have testing accommodations and they have a class that doesn't have any exams throughout the semester, they can elect to not send those accommodations to that professor at all. And so they kind of have the choice when it comes to that. If they feel like there's no necessity for the professor to know, they kind of have that option to keep it and not have that letter be sent out.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I think something I talk about with families often is if student had certain kinds of support in high school, I think I experience a lot of students who there's an excitement of starting a new chapter or like maybe starting over or starting fresh, and the idea that maybe they can start without accommodations or without the support systems they had in place, support systems of all variety, not just accommodations they may have received in high school, but any kind of those really structured supports that they had to support their success. And I hate to burst anyone's bubble, but there usually isn't a magical transformation during that summer period between high school and starting at William and Mary, and we want your students to be as successful as possible. So if accommodations are something that will help them thrive academically or in their living environment, we want them to take advantage of that resource. That's why Student Accessibility Services is here, really to promote student success, and we want your students to feel comfortable taking advantage of those resources, having them in their back pocket if they need them, and maybe as time goes on, they're less reliant on those resources. But that's why the office exists. So, and I know that they are really excited to meet all of your students and support them along the way. I don't see any other questions, so I'll just leave one with MC and Allison. Any last pieces of advice as families support their students this summer?
Ooh, that's a hard one. So I think just, getting in here and having that conversation with us and talking about whether accommodations are going to be or what your student is looking for or needs or would like. I will also say that something that often comes up in conversation when meeting with students in welcome meetings is just like support, especially when it comes to incoming freshmen, about having those skills to kind of start off by being successful, such as like planning an organization, time management, study skills, etc. While our office does not particularly like provide those types of services, we work really closely with academic well-being, who is part of student success, just like student accessibility services, and they do offer success coaching for students. And a lot of students with disabilities we will recommend that they get involved with success coaching so that they can work on those skills to help, prepare them, or as they transition or for their entire time here. So that would allow them to meet with a graduate student on a regular basis and just somebody who can also kind of check in, almost like hold them accountable. So that's a really big resource that, we refer students to when meeting with them for the first time. So that's something to think about. And it looks like Heather put that in the chat. So if that's something you want to take a look at ahead of the welcome meeting, we can have a more in-depth conversation about that.
Yeah, I would also add that just a great resource that we have to offer is our summer pre-orientation program. And that's a really great way for students to kind of get acclimated to campus before they actually get here in the fall. Orientation can be a busy weekend with move-in and then jumping straight in and then jumping straight into classes right after. And so having that kind of chance to really learn about some of the resources that William and Mary has to offer and some of the supports that we can provide during that week in the summer can be a really great opportunity for students with disabilities to really kind of get acclimated and get their foot in the water. So I would definitely recommend anyone who's interested to please feel free to reach out with any questions. We're happy to answer them.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for spending some time with us today, and thank you, families, for joining. The session was recorded and will be uploaded here shortly and sent to all families via email on Friday. All right. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye.